Uh, I don't know, some of you may have noticed that we've been playing around with different tools in different formats. The idea with going with Zoom webinar is to make it a little bit more interactive. So I really encourage people to ask questions as we're going, and I will try to keep up with what's going on there if people have questions. So scaling Agile sort of fascinates me. It's one of these things that I've been talking and writing and reading a lot about. I am not a software developer, so I do not have a background with implementing Agile, but I know several of the signatories to the Agile Manifesto, and their principles are pretty straightforward and really powerful. And so I encourage people, as always, to go to the Agile Manifesto, which you can find at agilemanifesto.org. And I think that this is a philosophy that should be adapted all across the enterprise, all across any company. But perhaps that doesn't mean exactly what it sounds like. So over the years, there's a lot of structure that's been built around the concept of those principles. So a lot of Agile implementations and a lot of meanings attributed to Agile that were perhaps not part of the original manifesto. And so I do think that we have to keep going back to the manifesto to make sure that what we're adhering to are the principles rather than the structural elements that people have come up with, these different frameworks for implementation. Those are all fine, depending on how they're implemented or how they go. But we don't want to confuse those frameworks for the principles that they're trying to adapt or implement. And so one of those things that's occurred in my observation is that Agile is often equated with lean startup or lean manufacturing. And there's definitely a lot of crossover, but they don't replace each other. They're complementary. And in the end, I don't care what people call their implementations, whether they're doing lean innovation or lean startup or Agile or design thinking or whatever. I think that maybe one of the problems with equating those different things is that people expect different outcomes, and then you meet resistance based upon those expectations. So, for example, often when I'm talking about scaling Agile or implementing Agile all over a company, the response is that, well, not everybody needs to be Agile, and not everybody wants to be Agile, and not everybody needs to be running experiments, and not everybody needs to be lean, and so all of these other components that have really nothing to do with the Agile principles are being used as excuses to not be Agile. And so one of the concepts I've been playing around with is trying to just think through, almost as a thought experiment, that if I was launching a new business today, or let me put it another way. If I had 1,000-person organization and I wanted to organize them from scratch, what would be the ideal way of organizing those 1,000 people? And my argument really is that organizing them based upon their function, i.e., all engineers together, all sales together, all operations together, all facilities together, all product managers together, all marketing together, is actually kind of arbitrary. And I think it's an artifact of the industrial age, when maybe that was the most efficient way of organizing, producing widgets at a cost that the customers could afford. And that's just sort of not not where the world is. Steve Blank actually wrote quite a bit about the scaling part of a business. So the last 2 steps of his 4 steps to the epiphany were about building out a large scaled organization and doing it based upon sort of these principles that we already know everything, right? So that's how you succeed and how you grow, is because you figured out a blueprint on how to build, market, support, sell, improve products or services for customers. And so when you have the blueprint and you're implementing the blueprint, what you want is an organization that can implement that blueprint with as little deviation from the blueprint as possible. And again, that makes a lot of sense when you're producing widgets and there's very little market risk for those widgets. But again, I'm going to argue that that's not where we are today. Today, we need to serve niche markets, and we hope to have as many of these niche markets to function as a large organization. But the fact that we have so many models of products, and we have so many products in different colors and all of these different features and functionality and all of these, think about the difference between the iPhone, Apple and the iPhone back in the day versus Samsung, right? That has hundreds of models and variations of the models. And so those are two different market strategies. One is, I'm going to go after people that love the simplicity, and as Steve Jobs said, something that just works as the iPhone. And the other business model is, we're going to have as many products and services that we need in order to tackle all of these other markets. And so in this world that we live in today, we're competing not only based upon the features and functionality, but the mind share even of people. And so it's very complex and it's very uncertain. I guess the other example I've used in the past is, if you're making a microwave oven in the 60s, you had technical risk. Can we build it? You had operational risk. Can we build it at a low enough cost that the middle class could afford it? But if those 2 things were true, there was very little market risk because it was raising the standard of living, making life simpler, et cetera, et cetera. People would buy it if they could afford it. It was, sort of life-changing. But if you look at today, that's not the case. You need all of the different features and the colors and the different models. And really, I think people are deciding, should I get a new refrigerator or a microwave? So you're not even competing against a specific product, you're competing against a whole category. And so that requires us to understand our customers and understand what their needs are and what their aspirations are and what they're driving for. We have to understand them way deeper than we did when we were producing the one microwave back in the 60s. And the globalization means that competition can come from all over the world. And so it's just a more complex world, and the sources of information and knowledge and decision making comes from the edge of the company, not the center of the company. The center of the company is, I create the blueprint. Now everybody does what I've figured out. The edge of the company means that there's all these changes and supply chain issues and economic issues, inflation and customer whims and customers changing their mind and competitors and emerging markets on the other side of the world, emerging competitors on the other side of the world. All this information comes from the outside in, which means that we have to model our companies to be able to take in that outside information and act upon it. We can't just wait for all of that information to get filtered into the center of the company. And so that's what's driving design thinking, lean startup, agility. It's the speed of information. It's the global interconnectedness. It's that the information changes on the edge of the company, not in the center of the company. So scaling agile really means that not only does your R&D or your software need to be agile, but everybody else in the company as well. a company is only as agile as the least agile part of the organization. So that's the background on why I think that we need to scale agile everywhere. How to do it, I talked last month about a specific framework, SAFe, which is the scaled agile framework. I can't remember what the E is for the enterprise. No, somebody will tell me. And that there was, it's all fine as far as it goes, but I think that I've heard some horror stories, maybe you too, about implementations. Often those implementations are driven by an outside consultant and owned by the outside consultant, and it's this top-down restructuring. And so then it just becomes another reorganization, which a lot of large organizations do every couple of years. And you lose the principles because of how complicated it is to transform a company, but also because of the rigid structure. So if you've got a R&D group or a software group that has already implemented Agile and you want to go Agile enterprise-wide, you don't need to take what the software group and the R&D group and apply that to everybody else. The marketing group doesn't necessarily have to have daily stand-ups. The marketing group or the sales group does not necessarily have to have a sprint duration of 1 week. Those things are arbitrary, and maybe they worked for one part of the organization, but those are decisions that should be made by the organization itself, by the people themselves, because that is a principle of Agile, is that the Agilists get to organize their work in the best way they see fit to accomplish their mission. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of structuring a company around missions instead of structuring around function. So what does that mean? So you have a company that hopefully has objectives that are defined over time horizons, from this year to 3, 4, 5 years out, and they're quantified objectives. They could be in terms of revenue, profit, margin, customer satisfaction, cost efficiency. You could have employee engagement, customer engagement. So you want them to be numbers, though. We're going to improve customer retention by 15% in year 3. And then, of course, you can then take whatever the time horizon is for those objectives, and you can break them down by year 1, year 2, year 3, and so on. So that's the very top. You start from what the strategic priorities, what the objectives are of the organization. And from there, you have sort of the first breakdown, which I'm not suggesting that you change. They're based upon business units or product lines, could be based upon regions. And so each one of those entities has a subset of or not even a subset, but a subset of the main organization objectives that belong to those next layer down, those entities. And if you aggregate all of their output, then you get hopefully the strategic objectives. And so now you have mission statements that are relating to those different objectives that are in the different business units or the product lines. And so then you go down the next layer. And so inside of a business unit, you might have products beneath the business unit, multiple products. And those products then are each have their own missions that if you aggregate all of those missions, you will have reached what the business unit contribution should be. So that's all pretty straightforward, right? So again, imagine that we're organizing a 1,000-person company, and this is how we're figuring out what the organization is. So now you go within each product. And within each product now, you have to figure out basically what is the what is the blueprint that we already understand? So what are all of the tasks that people are already doing that contribute to whatever revenue we're currently making? And so now you've got splitting up your different products into different product components. You have back-end stuff, you have IT stuff, you have marketing stuff, you have selling stuff. You have operational, returns, customer service, all of these different departments now within that product. Now here we're maybe breaking from the traditional structure because those functions that I was just describing are often driven at the highest level versus at the business unit level. And so you have your marketing group that's over here underneath the umbrella organization, and yet you have product marketing that's going on inside the business unit. So how is that line drawn? My concept is that it shouldn't be at the top. It should actually be within the business unit, within the product line. It could still be organized as a function, but maybe not. Maybe those people that are in the product management or product or sales or some of these other departments, normal departments inside of a business unit, are forming teams with engineers, with other departments, because their mission requires that interdisciplinary skill. It requires the cross-functionality. So cross-functionality is not an end to itself. Cross-functionality means we've got a mission, and in order to accomplish that mission, we need these different skills. And so this is where people who object to, well, not everybody needs to be agile and not everybody needs to run experiments and all those type of things. Now we start opening up this variable about uncertainty, but the uncertainty exists within the definition of because of the definition of the mission, not sort of this arbitrary standard. So if there's low uncertainty, we need to write these features or fix these bugs or build this software, and we know that that's true, there's low uncertainty, then the team that is accomplishing those missions within that realm are all going to be of the same function. They're going to have whatever skill set required is to achieve the mission. And so if the people on that team don't want to be quote unquote agile, they just want to be told what to do, they are still, it's fine. It's not, it doesn't change that. So somebody from the outside might go, well, they're all grouped by function. And you're saying, well, in the end, they're grouped by function, but we got there based upon the mission. So we're not saying that we're going to organize arbitrarily based upon function. We're saying we're going to organize based on mission. And if they all happen to be the same function in order to accomplish the mission, that's fine. We're good to go. So I think that that's sort of this major clarifying part of, sort of reorganizing or transforming a company around this idea of being agile. I think one of the big features of it is this idea of organizing as a team rather than organizing individuals. So individuals can be managed, their careers can be managed inside of a function. So if they're an engineers, then they're reporting up. One way they're reporting is based upon their engineering function, and this is where they up-level their skills and get the sort of mentoring that they need and career advice that they'd like, and all of these things that are for the individual. But the second reporting mechanism, which is reporting in a different direction, is the performance of their team in accomplishing their mission. And so you can start to imagine that if you've got this layer of agile teams where all of their missions are performance missions, are measured by performance, and that could be contributing to internal customers, not just external customers. But so they're contributing, if you roll up all of that ground level of these agile teams to the next level up, then that aggregation should get that next level up accomplishing their own mission. And so you can just imagine that as it goes up to the top, you're able to draw a direct line from the work that people are doing to what the strategic priorities of the organization. And it sounds obvious. It's maybe hard to reorganize in that way, but it's It sounds pretty straightforward. And what's crazy to me is that that's not how we're doing it. How we're doing it now is managers saying, okay, you're going to do these tasks over this calendar period. And then based upon my experience and a little bit of hope, I'm going to say that if everybody does those tasks, then I'm going to achieve my mission. But, that worked maybe when it was the microwave oven in the 60s, but it doesn't work when there's all of this uncertainty and complexity and ever-changing environment. Now all of those, we don't know if those tasks are actually going to help us achieve our mission. And it really creates this weird alignment where managers are so focused on the performance of individuals rather than accomplishing their own mission that it contributes to this, siloed nature. I can't allow other people to use my resources. I can't allow them to even get in the way or take time from my resources. I need it. This is my little fiefdom, and I need everybody else to stay away so I can do whatever it takes for me to hit my numbers. And when you manage people based upon these tasks and calendar, it really is, this is where we get to the point where, the engineering group goes, listen, we were on time and under budget. The fact that the product, nobody likes it, that's not our fault. That's the problem of marketing, or that's the problem of sales, or that's the problem of product management. But we did our tasks over the calendar period. We did what we were supposed to do. Whereas if you have the mission-based and this cascading missions ideas, then everybody is sort of tied to the higher mission. And you organize people based upon accomplishing those missions. And so you have the very low uncertainty side where things look like they're based upon function, but then you have sort of the uncertainty side, like, well, how do we increase customer engagement with product X? And the answer is, I don't know. I have some ideas, but we're not sure. Okay, well, so let's spin up some teams whose mission is to improve the engagement with product X. And then that is maybe a cross-functional team. You don't want just engineers sitting in their cubes doing it. You want a combination of those engineers that are willing to go and talk to customers and run experiments, working with design people, working with product managers, working even with customer support, working with sales perhaps. So then you have a cross-functional team because the mission creates the need for the different disciplines. And so now within the same business unit, within the same product line, where all of these missions are rolling up, you have a continuum of uncertainty, from low uncertainty to high uncertainty. And you have missions defined based to execute on what we know and learn when we don't know. So learn, exploration, customer empathy, running experiments, lean startup, design thinking, etc. We have those built into the teams in order to accomplish the missions, so that as a group, as a higher roll-up, we're optimizing the efficiency of accomplishing those missions. In today's environment, those are all fights because you're battling over resources on a calendar. And this one of the most common things I hear from leaders is we don't have time to do that exploration work. And so to me, that represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what that exploration work is. The other benefit from going through this exercise is that you reduce the work that is not contributing to the bottom line. And so when leaders are telling me that they don't have time to do the exploration stuff, I'm pretty confident that people are working on things that they should be a lower priority, but it's not prioritized correctly because the manager is just so fervently trying to execute harder in order to hit numbers. and squeezing the blood out of the turnip, which of course also leads to micromanagement. It leads to, oh, everybody's got to come into the office now. It leads to employees being unhappy because they're just being told what to do, many of them, rather than getting to exercise their creativity and their own inspiration. And you have the big quit. So, I mean, the ramifications are actually pretty serious. The difficulty is getting people over this hump to start introducing exploration into the work. And so I talk about this from a very large scale, because I think that we can think through it as a thought exercise, but we can also implement it in a smaller way if that's what we have control over. And so if we look at our own organizations, and if we're managing multiple people or multiple teams, then what I would encourage is to think about what are all of the missions that I actually need to manage in order to accomplish the objectives that I'm signed up for. And out of all of those missions, do I have the most important things covered? And can I spin up some teams that will actually work better than me managing individuals? So the idea, I think the other benefit that I see from really organizing a whole company this way is that if individuals are managing teams, if managers are managing teams, if leaders are managing teams for performance instead of individuals, it actually makes those leaders more proactive and more strategic than if what they're having to do is sort of sit on top of every individual and try to figure out whether they're accomplishing their goals. Again, the individual can be managed in a dual way. One is performance, and the social structure of the team will reinforce the behavior. It will hold the people accountable. If one person is having a bad day or a bad week, it actually doesn't adversely affect the team, most likely. And then the individuals have this other reporting mechanism that's really about their skill levels and like I said before, their career management. So when leaders and managers are managing teams instead of the individuals, like I said, they can become more proactive. It frees up their time. And now they can start looking at, well, do I have my resources allocated properly in order to accomplish my mission? And so I can rejig teams or spin up a new team or break down a team that actually isn't needed anymore. What has changed in the world? I can look outside myself and go, what's changed in the company or the world or the economy? Which means that I should actually change what we're up to in order to hit our missions. And they're also responsible for that flow that I was talking about, that communications flow where the information is on the edge of the company. They're responsible now for educating those that are the layers that are above them. Their responsibility for bringing in this new information and ensuring that it's getting across the company to other people that know, but also up the stack so that their priorities might change. They're getting new information that suggests that fundamentally things will be different. There's a company, a case study in my book, Disruption Proof, about Gerber Technologies that makes manufacturing software and hardware for fashion brands. So digital cutters and digital sewers and these 3D tools that control the machinery. And in December of 2019, January 2020, they saw news, they were getting information that the clothing factories in China were shutting down because of the early signs of COVID. And of course, Gerber could see the writing on the wall that this was going to affect their own revenues, their own customer revenues, their own customers' ability to produce their clothing. And so before the end of March 2020, they had spun up all of this essentially a platform that showed these fashion brands how they could create PPE, masks and gowns and medical stuff in lieu of their fashion brands. And they had made that change before the end of March 2020. And so that there's an example of this information coming from the outside and then the organization having this agility to change what they're doing based upon this new information. So that stuff is like kind of mind-blowing. And so I think that that's sort of the new norm, that all of these different disruptions are going to roll across our companies and our economies and all the rest. And so we have to start building into the company this ability to take in information and change. And to be honest, you've got, that could even change, you know, core company functions, right? All of that stuff, that the blueprint might change. And so by having teams where you could alter their mission and the team then is able to respond accordingly to the new mission, is way different than trying to herd all of the cats individually to try to get them to operate in a different way because of this. So dealing with uncertainty is built into the Agile structure if done correctly. Okay, so I've been prattling on there for a good 30 minutes. So curious if anybody has any questions or input or their own experience in attempting to scale Agile or just working Agile in a small way. Please let me know, and I'll be happy to jump in and see if I can get to any of your questions or comments. So, so I think that, you know, I dove into SAFe, again, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. And one of the things that boggles my mind is that in lean adoption, not lean startup, but like lean manufacturing, and in scaling Agile, there are people who actually do look at all of the work that everybody does. It seems mind-boggling to me. I guess that's like just not my forte. Like, I'm not going to be the person that does that work. But it's interesting that it's built around value streams. So value streams is a you know, a lean concept. I don't know when it was first adapted, but it's part of the, you know, the lean manufacturing that was describing the Toyota production system, how Toyota was building cars in Japan in the 50s that then, you know, became this worldwide framework. But so the value stream describes all of the activities that a company must do in order to create and distribute that value for customers. And so in the Lean Entrepreneur, I developed my own tool around value stream discovery. So what if we don't know anything? How do we actually create the value stream? This is, we already know for the most part how to implement. So what are all the activities that a business is doing and must do to create value? And the reason why it's lean is because going through that process allows you to cut all of the waste, which are all of the activities that are being done that don't contribute to the value. And so I think that that's, as much as people will sit there and go, scaling Agile, well, that would require us to do all of that sort of thing. And yes, it is, but in the end, it's not sort of as mind-boggling as one might think. There are, and a lot of the big consultants do that type of work as well. Mike Kendall asks, what do you see as the biggest headwind for leaders to shift the focus from traditional manager-based objective setting to a more cross-functional cascading mission approach? Well, the first thing is I don't want to just say it's all cross-functional. In the end, you're putting the cross-functional teams together based upon where there's uncertainty. And so if a particular mission is to reduce uncertainty in order to create more efficiency or to move the needle, then that's just part of the structure. There, again, it's a continuum from low uncertainty to high uncertainty, and you're equipping the teams with the resources necessary to accomplish the mission. So getting the mindset of the leaders, I think that the trick is getting people to think that, admit that there's uncertainty, I guess. So you can't really go to an existing leader there's zero uncertainty. why would they change anything, right? So I think that in some of the examples of the work that we've done, on one end of the scale, there was Roche Diagnostics that saw this need for a digital platform for, they have these monitoring devices inside these labs all over the world, but they had no way of getting the data back to a centralized place. And there was all this huge opportunity to build applications on top of all of the data. And so that was like a digital transformation, super high uncertainty. You know, you could hire people to figure out how to build it, but what needs to be in it, and you know, will labs and different HCPs, healthcare providers adopt it? They're, you know, a lot of uncertainty. And so the work we did there was really a scaled agile, but with all cross-functional teams. But you can imagine, Mike, that as that progresses, you get to the point where they say, well, now we know we need to build XYZ. The people that are actually building it are still on agile teams, but they're all the same function. They're software engineers, but they're still agile, and they still have sprints, and they still then have to check in with stakeholders and customers and even internal customers. And so the agile practices were actually built for those type of organizations, not for the uncertainty. But so the other end of the continuum would maybe be Roche Diabetes. So not diagnostics, but diabetes, where they had all of these products that were already in the market. And some of them were not doing very well. And some of them were in the process of being launched in these different new countries. And so there's a lot of certainty there around the product. But then there's some uncertainty around the marketing and selling and regulations and compliance and those type of things. And so the level of uncertainty is a lot less. And the teams are really comprised mostly of marketing and sales. And maybe you could have some HR, some legal people on those teams. So you could still have some cross functionality, but it's not like you've got as you know, varied interdisciplinary skills as one had in the diagnostics example. So there, it's the leadership in both instances. It's the leaders that recognize that there was uncertainty. So I don't think that anybody's going to adapt these principles without recognizing that there's uncertainty. And, you know, I've worked for people. One of the startups I joined was a services company that wanted to launch a product. And so I actually helped them launch the product. We just didn't hit our numbers. And the boss thought it was a fail to execute, when actually it was the normal process of overcoming uncertainty. And so I think that in our high and pressure environment, many leaders look at uncertainty and just think like, well, I've got the wrong people because they're just not working hard enough. And they look at it through an execution frame rather than through a uncertainty frame. And if they could look at it through an uncertainty frame, they would go, well, maybe what we could do is spin up this team that actually reduces the uncertainty. And I think that that's a lot of the work that Moves the Needle does. I would like to see more big events, like customer events, where customers are brought in and whole parts of the organization are learning how to interact with customers, both from a design thinking perspective, but also maybe an experimentation. So if we could get leaders to recognize that there's uncertainty, and then to run events or workshops or sprints that allows them to learn how to make their execution more efficient by reducing the uncertainty, I think that that's the hook. We'll see. The headwind is really, I guess, is just them perceiving that they don't have the time, or even leaders are not able to convince their leaders that this is worth the effort. Time's a tough one, but I just think that it's the tough part of getting over the tasks on a calendar requires you to put on that calendar exploration days, and those could even be partial days. we're going to take, figure out what 4 meetings in a month that you can like get rid of, combine all of that team into 1 day of exploration work. 1 day of trying to understand customers deeply, and 1 day of running experiments that validate assumptions or invalidate assumptions and get you to understand customer behavior, and then build on that. And suddenly you see the increased engagement you're going for. I don't know. So anybody else can jump in with a question or comment or their own experience with running Agile outside of, I guess you could talk about Agile inside the organization, but Agile outside the software organization. One of the ways that I just describe Agile, and I get very little resistance to this, is how often should you pause the work, take in new information, evaluate your work, and then go back to work. To me, that's like a good synopsis of Agile. And it's funny, sometimes I bring that up and people will go, well, you should be doing that every day. But, as a team for, trying to build real product or launch real product or market real product, every day is kind of tough. But building into the calendar, let's go get some new information. What's going on in the world? What's going on with startups? What's going on with economies on the other side of the world? What's going on with our own economy? What's going on inside the company? What's going on with our human resources? What's going on with our supply chain? Supply chain would be an interesting one. Like, how do you build into the process not only, hey, we need to have redundant supply chains, but in order for us to continue to provide value for our customers, maybe we can rejig our components, how we make the product. Is there an alternative way to make the product where we're not so reliant on that particular part that is stuck in the supply chain? So again, when you start thinking about how do I improve my business, there's always going to be uncertainty. The question is that how do we go and answer that uncertainty? And does it make sense to put together a team that actually has the expertise to do that versus me sitting in my room contemplating it? Well, I think if there's no other questions, we can spin this down. Oh, here we go. Alasa, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Question, you've mentioned performance. My impression is that many agile evangelists are not feeling comfortable in establishing real measurability, but I think it is clearly a performance-oriented way of working, not just mindset. What are your thoughts? Yeah, I'm not sure if it's comfort or the fact that it's really hard to measure. So I actually think you're exactly right. One of the key components of, to me, formulating a good mission statement is including the metrics in there. And I think that the default way to include metrics is what is the desired outcome. And often that's not quantified. It's more of a qualitative statement. Customers will be more engaged, or it's revenue based. So we all kind of know what the desired outcome is. We want more customers, we want more money, we want more profitability, we want lesser costs, et cetera, et cetera. But that's one way that people put out metrics. And then the other way is they get right back to all of the tasks. So now it's like, my key performance indicator is that you have accomplished these tasks within, by the end of September. And so that becomes a KPI, which isn't really a performance measurement, because the performance should be progress towards the desired outcome. And so using the value stream discovery tool I talked about earlier, or I mentioned earlier, is a way to come up with those real performance metrics. And I think it's one of the hardest things for people to do. And it may be because they haven't defined their group's mission in quantifiable terms. If a group has the responsibility of improving customer engagement on product X by 15% before the end of the year, that's a pretty hard, fast metric. So I can say, I can measure then every month or every couple of weeks whether that number is moving, engagement on this product, or number of people that are engaged on this product. I can look at the month-over-month growth of that. And so if you could have a hard metric like improve customer engagement by 15%, and we have already established or agree upon how we're measuring customer engagement, which is also really super key, right? It's people that are, if it's a SaaS product, it's people that are opening the product and using this particular functionality 3 times a week. And I have to have the measurement set up that I can actually see that that's going on. And these are classic, actually, startup metrics. And so then what I'm looking at is I'm going to spin up a team and say, okay, how do we improve that number? How do we get more people at that number? Or maybe we need people to log on 4 times a week. So how do I get people to move from 3 times a week to 4 times a week? And the moment I've identified those different ways that we can actually hit the progress metrics, that is then customer empathy, running experiments to try to figure out what actually moves the needle to hitting those metrics. So I think you're exactly wrong. Right. I think you're exactly right on. It's about measurability. I think it's that it's hard and people don't know how to do it versus maybe being against it, or maybe they don't have the infrastructure from it. I'd love to hear what you think about that. Like, do they not have the systems set up? People often think of this as being like a big business intelligence data warehousing issue, but it's not. I mean, if you've got a product, you ought to be able to measure whether people are using it. Obviously, that's different than in a retail environment. But even in retail, if people are buying a printer, you measure how much printer ink they're buying. There's all sorts of ways to create analogies as well. So if you actually don't have a way to measure how customers are using a product, you could use social media, you can set up forums, you can set up these different ways that people engage with the company that indicate that they're getting the value out of the products. And so then that takes time to build that, but you have to have an infrastructure that's in support of measuring these things. So maybe that's one of the issues, but certainly one of the biggest benefits from the digital age, from digital transformation, is the ability to measure really every step of the funnel, from a customer becoming aware of a product to becoming passionate about the product or the company. So hopefully that gives you some ideas. I will pause here for another minute in case anybody else has a question that they want to share. Otherwise, we will wrap up. If you found this valuable, I'd love for you to provide a comment on LinkedIn, share it with colleagues. There's a recording is available. Reach out, happy to discuss it further. So Lasse comes back with, in my case, I would say missing infrastructure possibilities to measure, but at the same time, fear of transparency, performance pressure. Thanks a lot for your answer. Yeah, the fear of transparency. I recognize that one. I have a client that actually is with that. And to me, that's really where the leadership needs to define that this is the way we're going to run the organization. So literally the board comes with soft priorities, soft strategic priorities. And so if by the time it gets down to middle management, or even, sort of the leaders of business units, they don't have a really super hard number that they're attached to, and that lets them off the hook, right? No, I did it. Look, as opposed to, the short, didn't hit a particular number. And there's always going to be reasons why one doesn't hit the number. If the economy tanks, then there are things that are out of one's control, perhaps. But I actually think B is, I think you're right about that. Fear of transparency. Yeah. So that's where the bosses need to demand transparency. Hard to change otherwise. But thank you for engaging. Thanks for the questions. So please like and share, and hope to see you next time, next month. And yeah, I guess we'll just wrap it up there. Thanks so much.